Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, December 15th, 2016. Hope everything's going well for you this morning. It looks like it's okay for us. Skype giving us some hiccups this morning. Poor Justice struggling mightily to get his Skype working on his end, but he is soldiering on, giving me the thumbs up, saying I guess everything's working and rolling okay. So thanks very much for sticking by us here. Good luck with that. Hope you can conjure up a Skype technician to help figure those things out. We're on the air. Thanks very much for finding a new way to get. He's just using Twitter as a backup for communications for us. But man, well, he's got to get that thing in shape so that he can hook up with Wink for the after show afterwards. That's going to be, well, who knows what kind of a challenge that would pose. But and if the worst thing for me is if the after show doesn't happen, I feel responsible for covering all the news. And Greg isn't here today. And so I pushed the covering the news thing off onto everybody else. And I just tell you what's hot on my Twitter desktop, which is not a difficult job, really, when you think about it. Now, making it interesting, that's different. That is more difficult. And I hope one day to be able to accomplish that as well. we got a low bar here at the Kagro in the Morning Show, but hey, no problem. We're soldiering on, and yeah. Well, let me say. Oh, you know what? I was reminded in my conversations with some of our favorite people, the donors to the Kagro in the Morning Show, and you can become one of our favorite people at any time, at any moment. There's no predicting when one of you might just open up your Patreon page and look for me, KagroX or David Waldman. You'll find me either way, and it's a pretty simple, straightforward, easy to find sort of URL and everything like that. And you can find it every morning, by the way, in the Daily Kos Radio is live at 9 a.m. post on the front page at Daily Kos, which of course you find by searching dailykos.com. It's very simple the way the internet works, and you can find our page there. The easy way to find it is it's patreon.com/KagroX with no spaces in there. I do urge you, and it will become a New Year's resolution going forward, to urge you far more frequently, like PBS frequently, if you don't watch out, to join in and support the show. It's something we kind of do for the pure love of it. But it would be very nice if we could also justify getting up every day and doing that, or when the wife is at home or the kids stay home and they want to do something else, and I say, I can't simply drop everything and go gallivanting off into fun land. I have a responsibility to people who want morning entertainment, many of whom actually don't care to even take it until the afternoon. But that's not the important thing right now. The important thing is, I don't know, I'm supposed to do this at 9 a.m. Anyway, we'd like to make it a sustainable living. And a sustainable living for a lot of people who are actually involved in the show would be a nice thing, too. Small steps, though. It would be nice to stay out of jail during the Trump administration, and that, I guess, could cost us some money. I think rich people get out of jail. So make me rich very quickly, and I'll be able to stay out of jail and broadcast to you. But we're slowly bumping our way up in the numbers over at Patreon. And the big reminder is for those of you who are already supporting us through monthly contributions at PayPal, check your email. I've emailed you, and I've gotten pretty good response from most of the people. I'm trying to switch everybody over to Patreon because, of course, Peter Thiel gets paid pennies, granted, on each one of our transactions, but pennies add up, and I don't suppose there's any real good reason why that guy needs any more of our pennies. So we're switching over to Patreon, who I hope don't turn out to be alt-right neo-Nazis, but I have no indication yet that they are. If that happens, carrier pigeons. I'm going to ask you to tie $5 to the foot of a carrier pigeon each month and send it on. If you want, just $4 and I'll keep the pigeon. Maybe that would be a good deal. And, we're just going to have to fund our way through this administration this way. And, I appreciate everyone who has made the switch, by the way. There are a couple of people remaining. And I guess at some point soon I'm just going to have to turn off the electricity over there. We pay $20 a month to PayPal for the privilege of allowing you guys to sign up for the convenience of monthly recurring payments. And I guess it's now getting to the point we're getting the numbers down and people moving over to Patreon where it will soon cost us more to allow you the privilege than we take in donations over there. So we're watching for that. And I guess if at some point you're still listening to the show and you haven't switched, but all of a sudden you notice that PayPal isn't deducting your monthly payment anymore, that might be the reason. Anyway, everyone should move on over to Patreon. Yes, Rebecca, believe it or not, don't beat up on Rebecca Romans. She's one of the folks who hasn't switched over, but she's sending me a note already in Twitter saying, and this is going to be the case for some of you, and I understand. I'm not worried. I'm going to leave it on for a couple of months to give everybody ample opportunity to do this. Some folks who signed up early in the month have had their monthly donation already deducted by PayPal. And if you switch over to Patreon right now, then I guess it would maybe deduct a second donation now, and you'll end up out an extra couple of bucks more than you were planning. So I understand that. Absolutely no problem with delaying that, and thank you very much for the monthly donations. Anyway, as a matter of fact, one of our donors, we saved them some bucks. It turns out, I guess, through one bug or another in the sign-up process over at PayPal, he had signed up twice for the same amount, and I said, in moving him over, I said, hey, you know what I just saw? Look at this. You said, I got the notice that you canceled and move over to Patreon, but you're still in my active donors list on PayPal. And sure enough, 1 day or 2 days after the first time, I guess he tried it again, and it wasn't clear that it went through, I guess, on PayPal, and he had been signed up twice. So all of you should make such a mistake, I guess, or find friends who are willing to make that mistake for you and pitch in. It's going to be a rough ride, and we'll eventually need lawyers, no doubt. Okay. Anyway, back to the news. I'm going to work out a better pitch than that at some point and be a little bit more forthcoming about it. I have to work up the courage to where I'm actually, asking people for money. That stuff sucks. You can see how difficult it would be to run for office under those circumstances. All right. To this morning's news. Greg Dworkin, of course, not with us. It's too cold in Connecticut, and all of the internet froze. And then everybody got sick and made appointments at his office somehow, and he has to go and fix them all. He's probably going to go with the chicken soup and stones in the pocket thing. But, people like to visit their doctors. So what do we got? This morning, Donald Trump is angry at Vanity Fair. That's the news. Why is he angry at Vanity Fair? He could be angry at so many people. In fact, he probably should be angry at the vast number of publications that are either taking up the open message to America's electoral college electors and asking them to reject Mr. Trump in their December 19th that they vote? I guess that's next week. So we're running out of time to let them know that it would be a desirable thing, at the very least, to say decrease the majority a little bit in terms of electoral votes actually cast. We discussed that when we read Brian Beutler's article. Why might it be of some interest to have him still clear 270? I mean, rather that he didn't. But what use might it be if he were to get 280 electoral votes? Well, it would be a story, for one thing. It would undermine his claims to mandate, for another, and it is, of course, an example of capital very important people, or serious people, as Greg formulated it. speaking out in official forums to say this guy is an unacceptable candidate for president. We may be stuck with him, but he's not going to get any better, and we don't hold out a great deal of hope for him. It would be our official position as the electors of the President of the United States to warn you that he is in fact unqualified for the position, and we don't want him. Might be stuck with him anyway, but we don't want him. And in the end, I wonder what sources like, well, Wikipedia that people turn to these days, that is regarded as something of a semi-official source anyway. But I guess the question would be government publications. My question is, what will they publish as the electoral vote count for Donald Trump? Will they publish him as having won the number of electoral votes that corresponds to the states that he won, and in states that split their electoral votes, the congressional districts? In other words, the total that he should have gotten if everyone voted as expected? Or will history record the actual number of votes cast? I would be very curious to hear something like that. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. I agree with Rebecca's assessment here. I'm interrupting for breaking news. She is retweeting Tom Bevan of, is it Real Clear Politics, RCP? Yes. Tom Bevan has the important news of the day. Uber self-driving cars, as you may have heard yesterday, introduced in San Francisco, I think, right? Uber self-driving cars, is it day one of, yeah, that's right. Uber self-driving car runs red light on first day, nearly hits pedestrian. So, whoops. By the way, is this self-driving car a Volvo? It looks like it's a Volvo from the front grille. So, you know how safe they are. So, I don't really understand how that happened, but well, maybe it was lonely and it was trying to merge with the human. Well, okay. That's an interesting story. So, yeah, update. Same day it made its debut, a video posted on YouTube appears to show an Uber self-driving vehicle running a red light and nearly hitting a pedestrian while walking on a crosswalk. The pedestrian was walking the crosswalk, not the car. I read that wrong. The video, which appears to come from a police vehicle, does not elaborate where in the city it took place. Now, that's interesting. What do you do as a cop? You're sitting there. You see a car run a red light and nearly run down a pedestrian. Can you pull over a self-driving car? I assume they're programmed to pull over for flashing lights just to get out of the way of an emergency vehicle. What do you do? Pulling over a self-driving car. Who do you ticket? It's a question we haven't thought about. Put your hands out where I can see them. Take them off the steering wheel. Put them out the window. And then, of course, no response, so they shoot the thing. But that's okay. There's no driver in it. Unless, of course, it's got a fare in there and it shoots the guy in the back. That'll be something. I guess that's a story we're all waiting on. Would that be a gun fail story? I don't know. We'll make up our mind when it happens. Just let's hope it's not one of the fabulous patrons of this show who gets killed that way. And I mean, I have compassion for all humans. I just have more for donors to the show. So if you think that's going to help you, by all means, kick in to the kitty here at Kagro in the morning. That's a lot of alliteration for you. That ought to inspire you to give money. Much money. Mucho, much. I'm trying to alliterate that to see if it will get any more money out of you. I don't know. I got to think of a better approach, as I said. All right. So what other fun stories have we in the morning? Oh, yes, that's right. We were talking about why Donald Trump was mad. I think that's what we were on when we interrupted for the Uber self-driving over pedestrian car story. Thank you for bringing that one up. Uber's on my list today. Anyway, so Donald Trump is mad, and he could be mad at people who are saying that they want the electoral voters, the electoral college, to vote for someone else, or at least not for Trump. Then we got to talking about why it might be of interest to have that happen, even if it didn't prevent him from either putting together an electoral college majority or, like we said yesterday, throwing it to the House of Representatives and still being installed as president. I would not mind at all. If we're going to be stuck with the guy, I would love to have him enter office with that kind of cloud over his head. Plus, of course, the Russian hacking, which is still very much in the news. But he's not angrily writing to newspapers who are covering the Electoral College thing. He's not, I mean, he might be, but that's not what we're watching. He's not angrily tweeting about newspapers who are saying that Russia hacked the election. He is angrily tweeting about Vanity Fair, which is amazing because he loves vanity. I'm not really sure why that bothers him so much, but he's angry because a Vanity Fair writer reviewed poorly the Trump Grill in the restaurant. One of, I think there's more than one, but the Trump Grill restaurant where he allegedly got his taco bowl from way back when. And they ate, Tina Nguyen. I've never been 100% certain about the pronunciation of that very familiar surname, Nguyen, but my memory, if memory serves, that's the closest I've ever gotten to getting it even closer right. She reviewed the Trump Grill, and she didn't like it. And she wrote about it in Vanity Fair, and so Trump is grumpily tweeting that the magazine sucks and that the editor, and I think he's yelling about the editor. If I understood someone else's reference in Twitter correctly, Graydon Carter, is that Armando would know? Is that the guy who used to torment him through Spy magazine? And now is that Vanity Fair? Is that the story? I don't know. I don't keep track of that kind of New York insider celebrity stuff as well as I should. I'm terrible with names. Let me tell you what Tina Nguyen says about Trump Grill. Oh, and why is it news? It's only news. What do I care? It's just, who gives a crap whether this restaurant is any good or not? By the way, typically speaking, the worst food available to a, middle class, white collar working person, the worst possible food you can get for lunch generally is that restaurant in your building. I mean, that's my office park, suburban, exurban office park experience, particularly office park stuff, where each of the nondescript 10 buildings in your office park each has the same little grill place in it. And, if you want grilled cheese or an egg sandwich, fine, fantastic. Someplace to buy a Coke and some M&Ms, beautiful. Occasional BLT, all right. But typically speaking, the place to eat that's actually in the building, so you don't even have to leave and you can eat at your desk, it might just taste worse because it's depressing. I don't know. There's nothing really wrong with the food. It's just not top notch. Well, for Donald Trump, the Trump Grill is that eatery. I don't know what the hell to name to hang on this thing. Anyway, Tina Nguyen, who's not forced to eat there, went to evaluate it as an actual destination restaurant and said, guess what? It's crap. And that shouldn't surprise anybody. And he's angry about it, and that shouldn't surprise anybody, except he's tweeting angrily about it. Well, the part that should surprise people is he's the president-elect of the United States and still doing this. And so the only reason this has any news value is it angers Donald Trump. So let's talk about it. It's just interesting because she does throw out in the first paragraph that there's an analytical value to this. So she claims anyway. Halfway through a recent late lunch at the Trump Grill, the clubby steakhouse in the lobby of Trump Tower that has recently become famous through the incessant media coverage of its namesake landlord, and the many dignitaries traipsing through its marbled hall to kiss his ring, I sensed the initial symptoms of a Trump overdose. Thanks to an unprecedented influx of diners, we were sitting at a wobbly overflow table outside the restaurant, in the middle of a crush of tourists, some of whom were proposing to their partners, or waiting to buy Trump-branded merchandise, or sprinting to the bathroom. As my companions and I contemplated the most painless way to eat our flaccid gray Szechuan dumplings with their flaccid gray innards. As a campy version of Jingle Bells jackhammered in the background, a giant gold box tied with red ribbon toppled onto us. Trump, it seemed, was already fighting against the war on Christmas. And I thought that this was in the front paragraph, but it's in fact the subtitle of the piece. After she says, I didn't think I read, maybe I didn't read the title of the piece. Trump Grill could be the worst restaurant in America. That might be overstating the case. But politics being what it is, it generates clicks, and the subheader is, and it reveals everything you need to know about our next president. Aha! That's why we're reading about it. So, what happens here? Donald Trump is, quote, a poor person's idea of a rich person, Fran Lebowitz recently observed at the Vanity Fair New Establishment Summit. That, of course, I don't know. Is it a ripoff or is it homage to other people having said it before, or a dumb person's idea of what a smart person is? That was the way someone had described Newt Gingrich. But I guess it's a hackneyed form. But she's a famous writer nonetheless and gets to opine to everybody at the New Establishment Summit, whereas I am begging you to give $5 to Patreon. They see him. I'm bitter. I'm not. I'm having a good time. I hope you are too. I don't mean to make you sad about listening to the show. They see him, says Fran, I guess. They think, if I were rich, I'd have a fabulous tie like that, manufactured in China. Nowhere, perhaps, does this reflection appear more accurate than at the Trump Grill, which is occasionally spelled grill, that is with an E on the end, on various pieces of signage. He can't even get his signage standardized. The guy has no, I don't know what. Anyway. For a guy who's so big into his brand, I don't know. Although maybe this is just a tenant who can't hang too much onto it. Anyway, on one level, the grill, or grill, suggests the heights of plutocratic splendor. A steakhouse built into the basement of one's own skyscraper. Doesn't feel all that plutocratic, but okay. I get the point. On another level, Trump Grill falls somewhat short of that lofty goal. The restaurant features a stingy number of French-ish paintings that look as though they were bought from Home Goods. Wall-sized mirrors serve to make the place look much bigger than it actually is. The bathrooms, I don't even understand this, but the bathrooms transport diners to the experience of desperately searching for toilet paper at a Venezuelan grocery store. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. It's linked to a YouTube. That doesn't feel like a good, breakfast time YouTube to watch, so I'm going to skip it. You're invited to do so, depending on when you listen to the show. And like all exclusive bastions of haute cuisine, there is a sandwich board in front advertising 2 great price-fixed deals. Sorry, not dinners. Could be a lunch. The allure of Trump's restaurant, like the candidate, is that it seems like a cheap version of rich. The inconsistent menus, literally, my menu is missing dishes that I found on my dining partners, were chock full of steakhouse classics doused with unnecessarily high-end ingredients. The dumplings, for instance, come with a soy sauce topped with truffle oil, and the crostini is served with both hummus and ricotta. I'll say it's ricotta for those of us here in America. I'm used to saying it in my part of America, in northern New Jersey, as ricotta. But, okay, too many Italians. Or Sicilians, I guess, specifically. 2 exotic ingredients. Is ricotta a exotic ingredient? All right. Not in New Jersey, it isn't. That should still never be combined. What did they put it in? Crostini. The menu itself would like to impress diners with how important it is, randomly capitalizing fancy words like, oh, here's another one that I'm going to give you the bastardized Italian pronunciation of prosciutto, if you're reading it at home. And julienne, and strangely also capitalized, house salad. Interesting. It's a salad from the House of Representatives is what that means. Our waiter, coiffed and charming, was determined to gaslight us, holy cow, into thinking we were having a good time. Trump gets the taco bowl and the lasagna and baked ziti, he said, before subsequently informing the table that we could not order the lasagna or baked ziti. That's interesting. Trump gets it all, I guess. And what a good diet meal that is, too. A taco salad with lasagna and baked ziti, or those, he doesn't get them all at once. He looks like he might, but I assume it's one at a time. The taco bowl and the lasagna and baked ziti, and that's a big lunch, even just one at a time. Lasagna and baked ziti. All right. Well, you'd think he'd dine better than that. I asked the waiter what Trump's children eat. Oh, they're thinner. That's a good choice. He didn't even seem to understand the question, or, like Marco Rubio, appeared unable to depart from his prescribed talking points. Oh, I've shaken hands with him before, and they're pretty normal-sized hands, he responded. That's in the talking points on the wait staff. I wonder now if Trump Grill is a tenant, managed by somebody else that just pays rent, or whether it's a Trump property in itself. Well, maybe we'll find out. Our table nevertheless ordered the Ivanka's salad, which I assume is what she normally eats. It's surprising that the waiter didn't have an answer for that one. What does Ivanka eat? The Ivanka salad. Okay. My goodness. Anyway, so let's see. They ordered the Ivanka salad, a chopped approximation of a Greek salad, smothered in a melting goat cheese. That's not usually what's on top of a Greek salad. And dressing, and missing the promised olives that seemed unlikely to appetize a Soul Cycle-obsessed, smoothie-guzzling heiress. Instead, it looked like a salad made by someone who believes that rich women only eat vegetables. I getcha. But the cuboid plant matter ended up being the perfect place to hide several uneaten Szechuan dumplings. And when there's photos accompanying it, and they're not appealing. The salad, not looking that good. Our waiter eventually noted that Don Jr. gets the filet mignon cooked medium rare. That's interesting because doesn't Donald Sr. like his steaks well done? Well, good for you, Don, doing it right. And not Donald, but Don Jr. doing it right. Also enjoys the garlic mashed potatoes and steamed broccoli. That seems unlikely. The steak came out overcooked and mealy, with an ugly strain of pure fat running through it, crying out for A1 sauce. It was missing the promised demi-glace, too. The plate must have tilted during its journey from the kitchen to the table as the steak slumped to the side over the potatoes like a dead body inside a T-boned minivan. Hope you're not eating breakfast at home. Don Jr. probably does not eat the filet mignon here regularly either. Come to think of it, judging by its non-cylindrical shape, it might not even have been a filet at all. And in fact, I'm looking at it, and it don't look like it, does it? Renowned butcher Pat LaFreda once dared me to eat an eyeball that he himself popped out of the skull of a roasted pig. What are you doing to me, Tina? That eyeball tasted better than the Trump Grills gold label burger, as they put it, a Pat LaFreda branded short rib burger blend molded into a sad little meat thing sitting in the center of a massive, rapidly staling brioche bun, hiding its shame under a slice of melted orange cheese. You're killing me. It came with overcooked woody batons called fries. How can someone mess up fries? And it actually says that in the piece here. And ketchup masquerading as Heinz. If the cheeseburger is a quintessential part of America's identity, Trump's pledge to make America great again suddenly appeared not very promising. Presumably, Trump's Great America tastes like an MSG-flavored kitchen sponge lodged between two other sponges. All right, it's a beating, this review, no doubt. And then there was the prerequisite, practically mandatory taco bowl. The dish became the most popular item on the menu after Trump turned it into a social media avatar of racism this summer, tweeting a photo of him happily devouring it on Cinco de Mayo and declaring, "I love Hispanics." President. It ended up being the most edible thing we ate. The fried shell, meant for one, contained a party-sized amount of lettuce and ground beef suspended in sour cream and Dago's famous guacamole, which NASA might have served in a tube labeled taco filling in the early days of the space program. Sadly, the taco bowl, perfectly adequate as it was, is not good enough to prevent Trump from deporting millions of Hispanics. Trump, it should be noted, is again hot on the wall. Earlier this week, thousands of supporters cheered Trump as he yelled, "We're going to build the wall, Paul," referring to House Speaker Paul Ryan. More photos of terrible food accompany, and our review continues. The only thing required to save the meal, booze, turned into its greatest disappointment. Trump himself does not drink alcohol, a possible explanation for why the cocktail seemed to be concocted by a college freshman experimenting in their dorm room. The tower was a tall glass filled with 3 types of rum and several types of fruit concentrate. One person named it the Cancun and slowly nursed the spring break-colored drink over the next 2 hours like morphine. The "You're Fired," an oversized Bloody Mary, appeared to be a chunky shrimp cocktail sauce, heavy on the horseradish, mixed with ice and a lot of vodka. They're getting rid of the Trump vodka, I guess. The Fifth Avenue, Grey Goose, ooh my, with Cointreau and a splash of cranberry, quote-unquote, tasted like vodka mixed with Crystal Light, the ultimate drink for an 18-year-old pledging a sorority. The alternative to these cocktails, which we could not bring ourselves to finish over the course of 2 hours, was Trump's own branded Trump wine, which came with 1 red option and 1 white option, like grape juice boxes, I guess. Perhaps Trump's veneer of a steakhouse is too obviously a veneer, meant for the hoodied masses to visit once and never return. There are already an infinite number of articles about how Trump's mass-produced products are meant to impress with a hollow sense of wealth. And prior to his victory, it seemed as if the world of Fifth Avenue power brokers agreed. The lobby was perpetually empty. The grill mostly frequented with Trump Tower residents and locals looking for a convenient power lunch. And if any of the bigger, better power lunch spots, that is, nearby, were full. But later, when I read previous reviews of the Trump Grill before he became a presidential frontrunner, I was shocked to discover that the food back then was bland, mediocre, and as eaters Robert Sietsema once wrote, that's a name I probably ruined, for timid people with digestive problems. Food writers, you're funny. In other words, it was a culinary marvel light years beyond the rich man slop we ate at the Trump Grill weeks after the election. And indeed, it was a slop. As soon as I got home, I brushed my teeth twice and curled up in bed until the nausea passed. Wow. Is this the dessert picture next? That's pretty ugly, too. "This is on me," said our waiter, who must have noticed that we barely touched our plates, that we sent barely touched plates back to the kitchen, as he slipped us a tiny chocolate cake buried under whipped cream and anxious drizzles of caramel with our check, and my heart broke. It's not his fault that he has to run garbage food back and forth from a slammed kitchen behind a door marked "Trump Employees Only" to a table waiting an agonizing half hour just to close the check. It's not his fault that the only way he can make it up to us is with a free cake, still frozen in the center, that tastes like Tums. Wow, he is getting pummeled. I'm angry. I'm going to start tweeting now, too. I instantly decided that I should give the poor employees of Trump Grill a break, considering that they now have to come in 20 minutes earlier to deal with increased security and spend their days dodging questions from the hundreds of enthusiastic/angry Trump supporters about whom they voted for. "It's written into my contract that I have to vote for Trump," our waiter said solemnly. "I'm kidding." I wonder if the skilled undocumented workers who may have once worked the line at Trump Grill, a strong likelihood considering the overwhelming number of illegal immigrants working in America's restaurant kitchens, and I'm quoting here the piece, illegal immigrants, were now fired, whether due to heightened security or new PR considerations. I reflexively want to be generous in my assessment of what the post-election Trump Grill says about the Trump presidency. Perhaps it's a sign that Trump is in over his head, and a shallow, mediocre man who runs a shallow, mediocre business empire and restaurant would sink and implode crushing the expectations of millions of his hopeful supporters. But watching Trump parade his enemies through the nearby lobby, taunting them with prestigious appointments only to cruelly humiliate them, I had to look over at the human cattle herd at the Trump grill, overwhelming a well-meaning staff with their dreams of a meal fit for a president, and wonder if he cared about any of them either. Good question. Well, was it worth it? I don't really know. I can't tell you for sure, but it was as good a way as any to ease into the news, I suppose. Other items in the news today. One quick item that deserves some attention. Colorado has voted, I guess, or a Colorado school district anyway, has now decided to allow teachers and school staff to carry arms on campus. That would be their own. They're not going to arm the teachers. Several different approaches out there to the armed campus. I don't know what policy, I guess you would say. Some include arming the teachers with school district supplied weapons and training them, and others the cheap way out. If you have a gun at home and you feel like bringing it, go for it. Probably the more dangerous of the two. And we do have this contribution from Bill Menezes, whose name I'm no doubt mangling as well, who says, countdown until the first gun left unattended in a toilet stall. I guess that's true too. Plus, of course, your basic accidental discharge. It usually comes within the first 2 weeks or so of implementation of the new rules, as people unfamiliar with daily carry in their workplace begin to take it up nonetheless. They may be weekend carriers, but they haven't been weekday carriers. And it usually takes not that long. And then the good news is there's rarely an incident immediately thereafter for some time. But in other places where we've seen accidents, so admittedly, there are other places that have implemented these rules and not yet had accidents. So that's good. And we, to be fair, we'll mention them as well. But where we see accidents happening in the news, it's usually within the first 2 weeks or so after implementation of the new policy. Well, up to 2 months, I guess I should say. In some cases, it has taken that long. So good luck. Stay low, kids, if you happen to be in that particular school district. Let's see. Other things that have captured my attention, some of which are more important, others not so much, but that deserve some discussion. North Carolina, we've mentioned to you in the past. It's been on our radar. They are having their special legislative session. They began yesterday, and I guess they're still in today. And what I'll do is I'll jump right in with Daniel's piece from the Daily Kos elections vertical. He hits the highlights here. North Carolina GOP shreds democracy, acts to strip power from new Democratic governor and high court. Guess what? And this definitely deserves attention, not just for what's going on in North Carolina, but before I even start down this road. Should I do it before I start down this road? I'll do it after I start down this road. How about that? I love the planning I do out loud on this show. I wish it was good content, but I don't know what else to do. Okay. Daniel's piece begins this way. North Carolina Republicans lost the governor's mansion and control of the state Supreme Court last month. But instead of accepting defeat, and come on, elections have consequences, move on, you lost, just accept it, all those things that are supposed to apply to the Trump transition that you hear from Republicans don't appear to apply here. Instead of accepting defeat, the GOP is mounting an 11th hour power grab to curtail all potential sites of Democratic power. Now remember that for the last couple of weeks, Pat McCrory had reportedly been plotting with Republicans in the state legislature to possibly contest the election results, and despite the results of a recount showing that he clearly had lost the race, simply claiming that there was some unspecified reason to contest the results and trying to throw it to the legislature under North Carolina law to determine the winner itself. And I guess you probably heard back from Republicans in the State House who said, that's going to cost us. There's going to be a lot of us who are going to be on the bubble for a re-election, granted in a couple of years from now, who really don't want to deal with that baggage. And saving you with this ridiculous move is not quite worth it. However, we do agree, you make a good point. McCrory no doubt was approaching them and saying, look at all of our work that's going to collapse, or look at all the ways that a Democratic governor with a Democratic Supreme Court will be able to undo our most important work over the next couple of years. You need to install me to make sure that this doesn't happen. And they said, well, there's nothing we can really do about reversing the Supreme Court, although we've got some ideas about that. But I don't know that our majority survives simply installing you as governor. So the next best thing is we let you go. After all, you haven't been a really great help to us, and it will be a lot harder to run for re-election midterm with you still there, with our having installed you, than it would be to simply say, let's do something else to protect our agenda, but just jettison you. By the way, I said I was going to wait to the end for this, but I guess I'm going to interject this observation, or at least part of it right now anyway. Great parallel for the national level, right? Asking the North Carolina legislative Republicans to be directly responsible for installing McCrory as governor was too hot a political potato. Is that a stupid way of putting that awful metaphor? It's a hot potato, a political hot potato. One that's too hot for these guys to handle. In other words, the notion of installing an illegitimate Republican governor over and above the clearly expressed wishes of the majority of voters in North Carolina, but just for pure power politics, doing what you can do to get that done anyway, considered too risky by state-level North Carolina Republicans to contemplate going forward with. In other words, were the Hamilton electors to succeed in knocking Trump down below 270 electoral votes and then handing it to the House of Representatives and saying, you fix this from here on in, Republican members of Congress, Republican members of the House at that point, seeing, they've just been elected, but they're already looking towards their next election run in 2 years, being told, well, Trump lost by nearly, and it might finally reach 3 million votes, and we're now being asked to install him despite the fact that at this point we'd be like 35, 37 plus electors saying, to hell with that, I'm not voting for Donald Trump. He's just not qualified for the job. We're going to have to install him over the people's wishes and over the electors' wishes as well. And his blood will be all over our hands. Our fingerprints will be all over his presidency, which will have blood all over its hands. However you want to sort that stupid metaphor out, or the two of them. They'll be directly responsible for having installed him, and that's too hot to handle for North Carolina legislative Republicans. And you'd have to ask yourself whether it would be too hot to handle for congressional Republicans too. I think it would be, but they wouldn't know what else to do, so they would do it, and then it would be fantastic. And then we'd go presumably into the next elections, if there are going to be any, with that hanging over his head and over the heads of all Republicans seeking re-election. I would not mind that as a result, as an outcome. If you had to get stuck with Trump as president, it might as well be under those circumstances. By the way, I see David Dayan also enjoying the Vanity Fair review, so it can't be too much of a waste of time. Thank you, David. I feel like you've validated my having spent 15 minutes on it myself. He tweets, "Thanks to Trump for referring me to that well-written restaurant review. I feel a lot better now." So there you go. I seek validation, obviously. If that wasn't clear from the begging you all to go to Patreon and validating me in dollar terms, I'm very much influenced by Donald Trump in that sense. Okay, so what exactly is the North Carolina legislature doing right now? They've decided that installing McCrory is too hot to handle, but what can they do? This is it. Ready? The scope of Republicans' effort to nakedly shred democracy so as to thwart the will of voters and desperately cling to power is breathtaking, says, again, Taniel over at Daily Kos Elections. The GOP-led legislature convened a special session that was ostensibly aimed at dealing with relief efforts for Hurricane Matthew, which struck North Carolina in October. So a little bit behind the ball, the 8-ball on that one. Like, it's been a while. Could we have a faster response to that here from our own state government? Apparently not. All right. But instead of taking up the hurricane relief, Republican legislators have introduced a set of bills that drastically change the structure of state government. What a surprise. The idea is for outgoing Republican Pat McCrory, who lost his bid for re-election in November, to sign these bills in advance of Democratic Governor-elect Roy Cooper taking office next month. The bills would limit Cooper's power to appoint and direct state officials. They would cut the number of state employees and managers whom he can replace from about 1,500 to about 300. It would curtail his control over the State Board of Education and the boards of trustees of the University of North Carolina system by shifting some of his appointment powers to the legislature, which they control, and subject his cabinet appointments to confirmation by the Republican State Senate. It may or may not come as a surprise to some of you that North Carolina does not require that in the same way that the federal level government requires the advice and consent of the Senate for many cabinet positions. And so they will get away with it that way. This is just the way the federal government does it too. Most people already think, and they're probably right, most people think that they already have the advice and consent power over the governor's cabinet just because they're used to it being the case on the federal level. The GOP also plans to strip Democrats of the majorities that they were set to gain on the State Board of Elections, as if that were an important thing for some reason, and on all county election boards. Under current law, the governor's party gets a majority on elections boards. The Republicans certainly enjoyed that while they had it, but then now they'll probably say, yeah, well, we were going to let the Democrats have their turn at it too, but we realized it's not really all that great a benefit anyway, so why not get rid of it? If it was a really great benefit, then we would have won the governor's race and the races for the state Supreme Court, and we didn't, so who needs it, right? I don't know. But they've redesigned it now. Under current law, as Daniel points out, the governor's party gets a majority on the elections boards, both the state and county boards. The GOP proposal would divide all boards between the two parties because bipartisan, right? Therefore fair. While bipartisan boards might sound good in theory, they could in practice benefit Republicans by fomenting gridlock and blocking expansions of voting opportunities, which is exactly the point of doing this, of course. And where have we seen that? On the federal level with the FEC, for instance, we'll have it equally divided. That way it'll be fair. Well, what actually happens is an equally divided board is incapable of acting ever because fair. I guess the fairest thing to do is to do nothing, except, well, it would be the fairest thing to do if both sides, equally broke the rules, regulations, and laws, but that's typically not the case. And so when a board is hopelessly deadlocked in all such cases, the advantage is to the people who don't bother to obey anything and just do what they will. So advantage Republicans in that score. In fact, Daniel continues, Republicans have benefited from just this dynamic in Indiana. What do you know? Where a new law established bipartisan election boards that required unanimous agreement. Unanimous. goodness, to set up new early voting locations. The sole Republican on the board in heavily Democratic Indianapolis was then able to block proposals to open more than one early voting site in the state's biggest county. Yet, it gets even more outrageous. The board's chair would rotate, with the bill effectively providing that on the state boards and most county boards, Democrats would only hold the chair in odd-numbered years, while Republicans would hold the chair in even-numbered years. Fair, right? Odd, even, that's one for you, one for me, one for you, one for me. Well, there's something wrong with that, and here's the answer. What happens in even-numbered years? There are elections in even-numbered years. All elections for president, House, Senate, governor, and legislature are held in even-numbered years in North Carolina. And gee whiz, Republicans chair the boards of elections statewide and in all counties every time there's an election. But it's fair because we rotate with Democrats and they get to chair it when there's not an election. And we haven't even discussed the state Supreme Court yet, where Democrats are set to take a 4-3 majority after winning a key election last month. Rick Hazen notes that Republicans are moving to limit the state Supreme Court's ability to review constitutional challenges, which would have the effect of empowering judges on lower courts, which are stocked with Republicans. But we're not done yet, because the GOP still has not ruled out introducing legislation to outright pack the court in coming days. They would expand the court by 2 members, whom McCrory would get to appoint, meaning Republicans would sneak their way into a 5-4 majority. Now, mind you, again, the outcome of the election was a 4-3 majority on the state Supreme Court. The outcome of the election. It's an elected state Supreme Court. 4 members Democrats, 3 members Republican. They want to pack the court by creating 2 new seats on the bench, but those 2 seats aren't going to be elected, at least not the first time. They're going to be appointed by the governor who just lost in the 3 weeks he has left in office. 2 appointments to an elected body by an outgoing, defeated lame duck because of legislation introduced in a midnight special session that was supposed to be about something completely different. Just saying. Democratic legislators have said that they will file a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of the special session, but guess where such a case would likely wind up? That's right, the state Supreme Court, which could have 2 additional Republican members by the time it hears the matter. The NAACP is organizing a demonstration in Raleigh on Thursday morning. Be there or be square if you happen to be in the North Carolina area, which means Virginia, that's me, and South Carolina as well. Flock to Raleigh. Anyway, North Carolinians certainly should. By the way, thumbs up to you, Justice, for the news that Skype is finally working for you. Congratulations. I'm glad that's happening. Phew. That saves the after show, which is good news for all of you who are interested in more news than I'm giving you. Anyway, I think that's well summarized by Daniel. It should be no surprise, of course, to any of you. He's fantastic in his ongoing efforts at the Daily Kos Elections vertical. Everybody knows that. So I'm glad to have him to turn to on this one. That sums it up nicely. Some things I want to say about that now. It's a time for additional analysis with Kagro in the morning. I need some kind of theme music for that, except I'd be playing it all the time. I don't think I've ever read just straight through a story ever for any reason. Okay. What's going on here? A couple of things. One, once again, I'll remind you, yes, North Carolina Republicans who lost the election playing extreme constitutional hardball, installing, changing the very nature of the executive branch of the North Carolina government, which is amazing for a number of reasons, not the least of which is, of course, the fact that they basically lost that branch, but 2, that they are changing so drastically the powers of another, I don't know, I mean, does the North Carolina state constitution not also contemplate a basic parity between the branches? Maybe that's the lawsuit that they're talking about. But of course, it'll be heard possibly by a second branch that will have been polluted by the Republicans of the legislative branch. They're going to change the nature of both the executive branch and the judicial branch by legislative fiat. That's going to be real interesting. We'll see how that one works out. But the fact that they're doing this for a loser outgoing Republican governor seems worthy of note too. And I'll hold it up in parallel to some of the reactions that we've gotten about the proposal to, for one thing, to install Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court through whatever means. There's also lots of popular agitation for simply installing him either as a recess appointment or simply as a brute force appointment, and say, under the argument I've seen floated that the Senate in its inaction has forfeited its right to advice and consent on the nomination. That's a little tougher to build grounds for, but, at this point I'd consider anything. But all the admonitions not to upset the apple cart, whether they come from moderate Democrats or from Republicans who either just are dumbfounded by the idea or are trying to purposely scare us off of it or what have you. All the admonitions that, for instance, the January 3rd high noon maneuver are, quote, not the way this works, unquote. Well, this isn't really supposed to be the way things work in North Carolina either, but they're doing them nonetheless. Of course, they would argue, well, everyone knows it's within the prerogative of the state legislature to do these things. They can, it is up to them, they can opt to pass laws that change the functions of the government. And even that is kind of tenuous. I mean, they can pass those rules, of course, pass those laws. They are, of course, subject to review by the state Supreme Court, which would be able to decide the question of, is it within tolerances to allow the legislative branch to so drastically curtail the powers or change the powers of not just one but both other supposedly, I think, co-equal branches of the government? Well, that's true too, they would argue, and yes, the state Supreme Court does have the opportunity to review that, and they will. And they'll find that it doesn't violate the North Carolina state constitution. And they'll find that because we will have installed 2 more conservative justices on the bench to overturn the results of the election itself, which left the 7-member court with a 4-3 majority. And see, all of this fits a little teeny-weeny bit more neatly into understood limitations, I would say. That's probably a fair assessment, than things that I've proposed or even the recess appointment installation of Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court. But on the other hand, who cares? I mean, if this doesn't let you know that, if this doesn't illustrate the point that Republicans don't even pause to consider that sort of niceties, those sorts of niceties, when it comes to getting what they want out of government, then I don't know what will. Another observation I feel I have to make, and maybe I will make it partly on Armando's behalf because I have seen him make this observation online and in Twitter and in writing elsewhere as well. The thing I'm talking about here is Armando has been pointing out to, and I really don't want to reinflame or relitigate the Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton primary fight, but it's too late. It's been reinflamed and has been relitigated. But I got a lot of sympathies for them, and more now that, I mean, the results are what they are. Now, I still don't fully believe, well, this would certainly have been a different outcome with Bernie Sanders on the ticket. I can't tell you what the hell would have happened no matter who's on the ticket anywhere. This was a weird freaking election. It just was for a number of reasons. But okay. Do I remain open to the possibility that there might have been a different outcome? Sure, but we just didn't get there. But Armando has pointed out, and I think it's worth considering, no doubt. I mean, it's a serious consideration. In fact, I think it's mandatory for you to consider this if you're really going to think this through. He keeps pointing out, and I think quite correctly, certainly first you have Hillary critics saying, come on, she couldn't even carry Wisconsin. It should have been hers walking away. Same thing for Michigan, maybe a little tighter on Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania is another one of those states that's constantly threatened to go red, but always ended up blue on those sorts of, on presidential elections. Not always blue, but very frequently the case. New Jersey, we're always hearing, well, it could go Republican this time, and it never does. Pennsylvania is always a closer threat, but it usually comes through. Anyway, this time it didn't, and everybody's up in arms about it, and rightly so. But Armando has pointed out, particularly with in the case of Wisconsin, well, how come nobody's asking the question of why Feingold didn't win? And it's a good question, right? I mean, is it not the case that Feingold is running considerably more from the Bernie Sanders standpoint than the Hillary Clinton standpoint? Maybe I misjudged that, but it's a good question. He certainly ran a more dedicated progressive campaign in the eyes of Bernie Sanders supporters than Hillary Clinton did. Others differ, but if you're going to make that argument, then you would have to wonder, how come? Well, why didn't Hillary Clinton carry Wisconsin? It was hers for the taking. Well, why didn't Russ Feingold carry Wisconsin? It's his for the taking. It didn't happen. Okay. But, so the argument's been made. Not everybody has been open to it. Fine. So I want to use the North Carolina example to point out that North freaking Carolina, which is a southern state, and remember all the to-do during the primaries about, they don't count because they're southern states. It's the Confederacy. That's conservative Republicans. And guess what? African American voters very rightly pushed back on that and said, a little bit annoying to be African American and be told I'm a Confederate. We're the ones that are pushing Democrats across the line when that happens, where it happens, in southern states. And it doesn't happen a great deal on the state level in southern states, but it does happen from time to time in North Carolina. In fact, it just happened again. So now you really do have to ask the question, all right, now wait a second. If things would have come out differently if we had had Bernie Sanders instead of Hillary Clinton, why does Russ Feingold lose Wisconsin? And why do Democrats win North Carolina? Not just the governor's race, but the Supreme Court race as well. And we pointed out, and we gave it short shrift when we pointed out. I was very impressed with it, but I didn't give it a great deal of time. But very impressed with the outcome of North Carolina's elections and credited the Moral Monday movement with carrying that across the line. And that's what did it. And that's largely an African American movement and while it's African American in its majority, it got accused anyway of being considerably more, shall we say, establishment Democrats, because they weren't Bernie Sanders Democrats clearly per se, and they were much more inclined to Clinton, so they were dismissed as establishment. But the establishment won that one. They won. So why does Feingold lose Wisconsin and Democrats win North freaking Carolina out of this? I mean, that's just another good reason to stop and consider, one, whether or not necessarily Bernie Sanders or a more progressive candidate, if there even is a way of defining that, would have won nationally the race for president, and it also calls into question whether, well, certainly the question is, does one size fit all? Would Bernie Sanders have won Wisconsin? Would Bernie Sanders have won North Carolina? And if he did win, let's say, North Carolina as well, would that have been a gift delivered, gift wrapped by what? By the Bernie Sanders base, or would it have been delivered by a base of loyal North Carolina Democrats, large numbers of whom are African American and are organized as such? I guess you'd have to ask that question, taking a look back at the election, and I would suggest that maybe the answer is kind of complicated. It doesn't mean that Bernie Sanders would have lost. It doesn't mean that he would have won. It doesn't mean that it would have worked differently in different places. All of these things are true. It's complex, and you can't just point to one thing. And I think, in fairness, if we all sit down and think about these things, we do come to that same conclusion. But, I guess we can only get there if we grant that, yeah, okay, it didn't work the way Hillary Clinton's strategists thought it would or should. It also didn't work really the way people who are a lot closer to Bernie Sanders' position thought it would or should in Wisconsin. So there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. A little from column A, a little from column B. I'm willing to accept that. But North Carolina is an interesting counterexample, or not even counterexample, but an additional a great piece of additional data that goes alongside the Senate results in Wisconsin. Statewide, okay, Democrat should have been able to carry Wisconsin and didn't. And really, Republican should have been able to carry North Carolina and didn't. What happened? All right. Gideon asking, should we fight to get Garland on the Supreme Court? I think so, although, there's some disagreement about how to do it or whether things are possible, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we should be fighting for that. A lot of people have pointed out, well, Republicans in the U.S. Congress can likely undertake to do the same thing that the Republicans in the state legislature in North Carolina have done, pack the court. And again, I'd say, that option is open to them. They can do that. It could happen. It could be the way they deal with our fighting to put Garland on the Supreme Court. But it also could be the way they deal with our not fighting to put Garland on the Supreme Court. I mean, they might consider it too hot to handle, but maybe not. Although I guess the first fight to have is the one in North Carolina. Make it too hot to handle. And I think that, although the results won't be in for 2 years as to whether or not it's too hot to handle, if we actually run the trial, it's, I think, within reach to say, we don't need to wait 2 years. We just kick the ass of your incumbent Republican governor on this very issue. His stupid bathroom bill, his reactionary politics, cost him the race, and it cost you the Supreme Court. Now you're trying to undo it, and you've already figured out that it's too hot to handle to put him back in the governor's mansion. And right now, the job is to convince you that it's too hot to handle to go with court packing. But okay, you might decide to do it anyway. Well, you'll be punished for it. And I can show you the results of this past election and tell you that in a year where everything broke right for Republicans, so much so that crazy-ass Donald Trump is going to be president of the United States, having lost the popular vote by almost 3 million votes, with all that breaking right, you still only kind of squeak by. And in North Carolina, not only did you not squeak by, but it went the other way on you. In the face of this wave of ridiculousness, the right thing ended up happening here in North Carolina anyway. You want to respond to that. We kicked your ass because of your reactionary politics on the bathroom bill and any number of other dumb things that you guys insisted on fighting. The culture war is going to save you. The culture war lost it for you. Now you guys are going to be, A, trying that on the national level, and B, hoping to try it at an accelerated pace in North Carolina. I suggest to you that you'll lose even bigger in a couple of years. If the Moral Monday movement can hang together and keep people's interest in a non-presidential year. I guess that's one of the biggest challenges, and maybe that's what they're counting on. But if it's too hot to handle in North Carolina, then perhaps we ought to be showing people, one, it will be too hot to handle in 2 years in North Carolina, and two, it will also be too hot to handle on the federal level. And the short version of that was my saying a couple of days ago, yes, I recognize that they might pack the Supreme Court in response to our fighting to get Garland installed, whether we win or lose, or whatever. I mean, or whether we even try or not, they'll be contemplating packing the Supreme Court. I mean, I guess I put it to you this way. I am not at all certain that if we surrender entirely on Garland and allow Donald Trump to name the craziest Republican conservative justice possible to the Supreme Court and thereby secure a 5-4 majority, I am not certain. Why would anybody think that Trump Republicans stop at 5-4? Do you think that they don't contemplate a 9-0 majority? I don't know that they're going to be out there, I don't know that they're not going to assassinate liberal members of the court. I tend to doubt it, and I wouldn't want to arrest them for any pre-crimes because I don't want to upset the apple cart or violate any political norms, because everybody knows that the only norms that are left are the ones that we decide not to destroy, I guess. But hey, they would rather have a 9-0 majority, but certainly they would settle for 6 or 7 votes, if necessary, for them to settle for something. There's no reason why they wouldn't try to pack the Supreme Court anyway, even if they already had a 5-4 majority, except that members of the Republican conference in the Senate would say, gosh, this seems too hot to handle. I really don't want to go into the 2018 midterms having done this, particularly having done this for no reason. So the likelihood of their packing the court if we don't do it is, I guess, considerably lower, and there will be pragmatists who point to that and say, therefore, we ought not to do it. I mean, a 5-4 majority for Republicans sucks, but it's better than a what would we have there? It would be better than a 7-4 or 8-4 if they decide to just pack 2 or 3 more seats on there. So why don't we not do anything and roll the dice and figure that they're not going to want to go along with a court packing scheme if it is necessary. And it's a good guess, and it's probably even true, but everything has to stand pat. And I tell you what, honestly, I bet that among hardcore Trump-supporting Republicans in Congress, and even weak Trump-supporting members of Congress who will become convinced over the next 2 years that what it takes for them to stay in office is to become even more outspokenly and audaciously bonkers, I guess conservative, for lack of a better term, more Trumpian in their approach to how they handle their own office over the next 2 years. I don't know that they accept a 5-4 conservative majority if any case, even remotely touching on culture wars, happens to go the other way for some weird reason. If there's a attack of conscience on the part of one or another of the conservative justices, and though they have the 5-4 majority, the case is decided by the 4 liberal justices plus 1, whether that be, name your, whoever it is. Through some magic, they have some crazy reason for coming up with a liberal argument for something, and it goes goes opposite the way they were expecting, they're going to start looking for answers about how they can make sure that never happens. You know that they'll howl for the head of the conservative justice who flips and push for their who knows what, impeachment, assassination, retirement, whatever it is that they feel like pushing for that day. But they'll be wanting to hang that person as a traitor and be looking to pack the Supreme Court. They won't brook any losses. So it's entirely possible that what you're really seeing here is not only will we have to surrender on the question of placing Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court, we will have to surrender on the possibility of winning a case at all in the Supreme Court. We'll have to go out of our way. Don't argue the case too hard. We might actually win, and then they'll pack the Supreme Court. We can't be sitting on a constantly lit bomb like that. And, that's not exactly how I expect them to approach things. I think that they'll not take that into consideration or say, well, we can't be surrendering in front of the court just to placate angry Republicans. We got to fight hard. And if we lose, then, so be it. But if we win and then we end up on the losing end of the stick because they pack the court, well, then I'm fine going into elections with that. I'll fight them on court packing. Yeah, well, I will too. I saw it earlier than you did. And in the meantime, I've had a fifth justice on the Supreme Court. And yeah, it would suck to end up in a minority again because of court packing. That's true. But I guess the realists then say, well, all right, think about it this way. We don't put Garland on, and then we lose a case, or we win a case legitimately, and then they pack the court. Then everyone will see their court packing is illegitimate. Yeah, maybe, but they may just see it as illegitimate anyway because court packing has a terrible connotation. Everyone was taught that was a terrible thing to do, whereas with Garland, everyone was taught the president gets to appoint the new Supreme Court justices, and frankly, half the country probably didn't even notice that he wasn't already on the court, and let's roll the dice that way. They won't take my advice for it. That's likely true. And it's probably both because they're afraid of blowback and don't believe my interpretation of things. But again, it all comes down to the amazing power of controlling the gavel. When you hold the gavel, things break your way because the power to decide what way things will break is in the gavel. And, again, the North Carolina legislature is showing you what can happen when you control the gavel. You're not supposed to be able to just call a bunch of extra special sessions in service of a lame duck outgoing governor. You're not. You can do it, but you're not supposed to be granting him extraordinary powers and stripping powers away from the guy who won. Can you? Yes, you can. Are you supposed to? No. You can pack the Supreme Court with unelected justices, even in a state where the Supreme Court is elected. You're not supposed to, but you can. How can you? You control the gavel. Outrage. I can't believe they're doing this ridiculous, upsetting yet more norms. How dare they? Yeah, how dare they? And we're going to sit there and not. That's all it comes down to. I understand the pressure not to upset the apple cart, to look reasonable, to stay within norms. Don't be the one violating more norms. Jonathan Chait just wrote another piece that essentially made the rather ridiculous argument that it would be hypocritical for Democrats to break any more, to strain or break any political norms while complaining that Donald Trump was straining and breaking and shattering and exploding and decimating political norms. That's hypocrisy in his view. In mine, not so much. I understand the point, but it's truly an academic one, especially if what you're really talking about is violating political norms in ways that try to restore at least the balance that should have been there had the norms not been violated in the first place. And that's the outcome of placing Garland, one small example, on the Supreme Court. The norm that was violated here was that the president is entitled to at least votes on his nominees. We've been over this ground, of course, in the nuclear option fights that have come in the past. But, things have been stretched beyond the breaking point. We now have it such that, originally the formulation was that the president only gets 3 years of a term to nominate justices. And during the election, they made it quite clear that that would be expanded to the entirety of a 4-year term should Hillary Clinton win the White House. That's unacceptable and an explosion of a political norm. It would absolutely be an explosion of a political norm for them to pull the January 3rd high noon maneuver. And yes, again, I understand the objections of that's not the way it works. But guess what the way it works is? The way it works is the way the gavel says it works. And you can fight about it afterwards, but it's a difficult battle, uphill to say the least, to undo something that's been done, even if you don't agree with the way it has been done. It's not impossible to undo, that's true. And it's not impossible to trump. That is also true. Not capital T, but lowercase t, Trump. But, without having to go too far into explaining the high noon maneuver again, if Biden shows up and takes the gavel, and he's entitled to do that, and recognizes somebody other than Mitch McConnell to speak on January 3rd, what are you going to do about it? You can sue. Yes, absolutely you can sue. It might even work in the end. There's been some interesting and credible theories put forth about how a lawsuit against this might work. And a lot of it requires doing things slightly different than they normally have in the courts, because this sort of political question is usually avoided studiously by the courts. We don't touch this kind of thing. The decision on how to run things internally in the Senate is up to the Senate. Well, but there would be the question, of course, is was this the Senate that made this decision? And it would be a good question and an open one. And we don't know for sure how they would treat it. The Senate says it was the Senate, but it only said it was the Senate because you were excluding some other portion of the Senate, which arguably would already be a part of the Senate, from including itself in that number. And it's a question of, was the chair entitled to rule as it did? And that's a pure political question, normally avoided by the courts, but they might shatter a political norm and decide to undo this sort of thing in the service of a political agenda, which would just be, par for the course. We may end up on the losing end of it, but we are definitely on the losing end of it right now, as it stands, without Garland on the court. If the vice president were to take the gavel and recognize a member of what was supposed to be the minority in the Senate, but temporarily he might rule, is a member, in fact, the leader of the temporary majority in the Senate, well, that is a constitutional question, and the Senate has decided constitutional questions for itself in the past. It does it all the time. There's a procedure for it. How does a constitutional question get decided in the Senate? It is referred to the body for a vote. Now, ordinarily, you know exactly who is in the body and who is not. But wouldn't that be interesting if the very constitutional question itself was who's in the body and who is not? And that would arguably be grounds for a court to insert itself, but it would be breaking a political norm by itself to do that. It's a complex question. It goes around in circles. There's a lot of meta involved in it, and you could lose in the end, but you are losing now. So what's the difference? That's the way I'd put it. If the constitutional question is decided in favor of the Democratic position by an by a temporary Democratic majority, Republicans would obviously object. They would sue, they would scream, they would kick, punch, and gouge, but they might not find any help either. They could go jurisdiction shopping and look for a newly elected senator from a state that's in a district where you could pull an extraordinarily, you'd have much better odds at pulling an almost entirely conservative panel on any appeal. That so you find a district court that's likely to give you a conservative judge and a conservative ruling, and to preserve that ruling on appeal and then send it up to a 4-4 court, or ostensibly a 4-4 court, possibly well, I guess if we went through with this, possibly a 5-4 court, though people also say, well, what if Chief Justice refuses to swear him in or admit him to the building? And all of that is hanging out there. I'd love to have that resolved at some point. Because right now it's resolved as no, you lose. The end. I'd love to have a shot at winning. But we're not going to get that because people are worried about violating political norms. But what can I tell you? Somebody may decide that, in the end, it's true. The courts may finally say, well, all 100 senators and senators-elect should have had the opportunity to vote on that. And one of the other arguments, the oath isn't what triggers the assumption of the office. Well, that's not the way it works now, but just like Bush v. Gore, Equal Protection Clause was not supposed to work the way it worked in the Bush v. Gore case. But then it did, because somebody became convinced that it should, and now we live with the consequences. Well, why couldn't you live with the consequences of the decision by the chair and the decision of the courts to say, as tempting as it is, this is really not our place. It's up to the Senate to decide these things, and it did. We think it decided weirdly, poorly, or in a way that sets bad precedent. Well, we've had bad precedents before. Could the Republicans retaliate? Sure, they could. Would they? Yeah, they probably would. Would it be better or worse? No one knows. No one knows. But I can tell you how it's going to go without this 5-4 majority for Republicans during an administration that is fascist in its approach to governance and recognizes no limitations on itself and is determined to eliminate the checks and balances as a part of, that have existed as a part of our American government since its founding. But, I guess you could roll those dice too. I don't know. Anyway, I think it would be much more interesting to try something like this. And if short of that, I guess there's this. It would be interesting to see Dick Durbin attempt to get recognition from Biden on the 3rd, regardless, even if he has no intention whatsoever with going ahead with this. Just basically to screw with him. You know what? Just say, I just have some welcoming remarks that I wanted to make to the new senators-elect, and I'm looking for some time on the floor, and see if he is recognized. And then I guess you could fool around just a little bit more just to make people sweat a little bit. It might be interesting to then, I mentioned this the other day, to be recognized to speak and start asking the question, say, by the way, if I were to suggest the absence of a quorum right now and the clerk was to be directed to call the roll, what names would be on the roll and what names would not? Or another variant of this, by the way, would be, let's have Chuck Schumer, who everyone acknowledges is supposed to be the new majority leader or minority leader in the Senate. Let's see him show up on the floor on January 3rd at noon and rise and seek recognition to speak. Simple. And again, you could say ahead of time, I have no intention of pulling the high noon maneuver. That's okay. I mean, I've lost on these questions before, right? I have no intention of pulling anything like that. In fact, I seek unanimous consent that the majority leader and minority leader both be recognized for 5 minutes at most for welcoming remarks only and no other purpose. And if you'll agree to that as a unanimous consent request, that's all we're going to do. And let's agree again that part of the unanimous consent request shall be that all other motions besides the presentation of credentials and the swearing in of new senators shall be out of order. Would you agree to that? Now, they might, as a matter of principle, refuse to agree to that, in which case, hey, do what you want to do. But if they agreed to that, that would be interesting to have somebody move that as a unanimous consent request, and then ask that Chuck Schumer be recognized to speak. It would be very interesting to see whether, if someone raised an objection and said, I'm not certain that the gentleman who now seeks recognition is entitled to recognition. He has not yet been sworn in as a senator. And that would help solve the issue, solve the question. And depending on how the chair ruled, it might settle the question. I don't know how the parliamentarian would advise the chair to rule on that question. And it may very well be that the parliamentarian would say, yeah, in our view, it's the clock that controls, not the oath. But if it were someone else's view, say the vice president's, that the oath controlled, which I would argue is a strict textual interpretation of the Constitution, Article 6 says the oath is required. I don't remember exactly how it states the case, but we'll flip through our handy-dandy pocket Constitution, which just proves that I'm a patriot, and read it aloud, right? Where was it? In this last clause here. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, etc., shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, yada, yada, no religious test, etc., shall be bound by oath. Well, if you're a senator or a representative, it's because you've been bound by oath. My strict constructionist interpretation of this is that the oath is required. So one test would be, of course, I'd invite any Republican to waive the taking of the oath or to not do it, right? I would just say, you know what, the oath isn't necessary. The clock did it. Thanks. I'll be going now. Just don't take the oath and see how that goes for you. I mean, it might go fine. They might rule, and we might have to go to court for it and say the clock controls, not the oath. I should be allowed to vote. It would be an interesting thing to see how the clerk handles calling the roll, how the Secretary of the Senate handles everything else. Do I include you on the roll if you don't take the oath? I don't know what to do. But delay taking the oath for 5 days and see what happens when you have quorum calls and who gets called and who doesn't. Like I said the other day, if you just spring it on them as a surprise, it's likely that the reading clerk will just read the roll that was prepared in anticipation of the swearing in going without any hitches. But try that. Or try to get recognized before the swearing in if you are Chuck Schumer. And if someone were to object, I don't think this guy is entitled to the floor just yet. He will be in a few minutes. Just be patient. But if you need to recognize a floor leader for the Democrats, right now that would probably be Mr. Durbin of Illinois, and you'll have to go to him. I'd love to get rulings on that. Just as test cases. You don't even have to go forward with the high noon thing. Just test it out. But, of course, if there was no reason to test anything out, I'm sure everybody who wants a smooth transition of power because they don't want any more apple cart upsetting going on will just be just as happy to go through the normal procedure, which is to simply go straight to the swearings in. Though it has happened in the recent past that leaders rise for brief remarks. I still think that there are people who dispute that that's even possible because of their interpretation of the Senate rule that says that the introduction of credentials of certificates of election for newly elected senators shall always be in order. They misread that to mean that it takes precedence. They've changed the wording. They don't simply just quote us a thing that says it shall always be in order. They always supplement that by saying, so that means it takes precedence over all other motions. And I don't believe that's the correct interpretation. I believe that what it means is that should anybody rise for that purpose and gain recognition and present credentials of a newly elected senator, it would be impossible under the strict interpretation of the rules for the chair to say that motion is out of order at the moment. That's all it means. It doesn't mean, well, it shall always be in order. That means I can interrupt an ongoing speech and introduce those credentials right now. I can start waving them, and the Senate will gavel down the person who holds the floor and says, that guy gets to interrupt you because it shall always be in order. in order means it comes in its turn. In order. That's all. It's simple. In the order that it's supposed to come in. When that person stops speaking, you can seek recognition. When he asks what your motion is, you say that it's a motion to present the certificate of election, and I'll say, fine, great. There are certain things that you could say, and my motion is that we, do something else. Whatever it is. And that's the sort of thing that you might say, well, there's business pending, and that motion is out of order. All that it means to say that it shall be in order at any time is that the ruling is simple. If you ask whether it's in order to present the certificate of election, the answer is yes, it is. Go ahead and do that. It doesn't mean it takes precedence over any other business. That's just wrong. Now, having spent 20 minutes or more on that, Gideon says, I'm not thinking about procedural moves with respect to Garland. It just seems, well, he says, should we be fighting to get Garland on the court? Dems, it seems, are too depressed to fight for Garland. I guess there's also the question of, should Garland be the one that you fight to get on the court at all? And it could be anybody, absolutely. I went with Garland because he had the advantage of having been a known nominee, and one which a large portion of Americans might already think is already on the court anyway. And if you spring a surprise, that gives away half the game. But should we be fighting for it? For that nomination? Yeah, I think so. I think that you should be fighting about almost anything at this point, given what's going on inside the incoming Trump administration and what they're going to be doing, and given what Republicans are doing on a smaller scale in North Carolina. I don't even know that it's smaller scale. I mean, it could easily end up being pivotal in the next election if they get to do what they want with voting rights there. Bill, along the way, has commented, by the way, that he saw a 2005 Portland Press-Herald story this week highlighting how Alito insisted that Roe v. Wade was settled law. Ha ha, I laughed. And, he says, politically speaking, later on in the conversation, the Democratic base would hail the Senate Democrats as heroes for at least trying to do something. Let's see. Gideon clarifies now. He says, I'm thinking about demonstrations and pressure. Yeah. I mean, again, presence in real life space is always appreciated, especially if it's focused. And demonstrations and pressure for Garland in particular, sure. And there already have been some. It's just not getting a great deal of attention, though I wish it was. But yeah, there already are demonstrations and have been demonstrations about Garland. I think they're probably dying off in the face of outrage over other things. Should they be continuing? Yeah. Can I make them continue? I wish I could. And I can't even probably convince people that they need to lay aside their other concerns, like Trump's enormous conflicts of interest that they could be protesting as well. But should we? Yeah. That's up to us, of course, as Americans. And some of us are doing it and some of us are not. And I'm not particularly, look, I'm not out in the street every day. It's my fault as much as anybody else's. Bill has another comment. There's a not insignificant number of Americans who believe Judge Judy is on the Supreme Court. That's true, too. And I guess if you can get away with that, then you can probably get away with convincing people that Garland is on there, too. How many people are present in the demonstrations? They're not huge. They're not massive in terms of the ones that have been strictly about placing Garland on the court or giving him his due or giving him his vote anyway. That has to be acknowledged. It's not... Yeah, I mean, that's a good point in that it's not likely to light a fire under Democrats in the Senate. They're going to have to find the inspiration to do this on their own, or just figure out that this is what it's going to take, or this is what we're going to be subject to for the next couple of years, and we'd like to give as good as we get. But they haven't gotten yet, so they're not likely to recognize the necessity of how far they're supposed to go in giving. We're just at that tactical disadvantage. It's going to have to happen to them a lot first before they get good and mad and try to give as good as they get. But, of course, the downside of getting first is that you end up demoralized and lose your will to give. So we're a little bit trapped by circumstances in that sense. But yeah, I mean, Senate Democrats, we do know this about them. This is the way most senators operate. They're going to look at, the situation and say, there's just not mass demonstrations going on in the street. I'm just not hearing a lot about the need to install Garland. However the methodologies fall out, whatever way we choose to try to install him, people are not exercised about this. Whereas on the other side, they're agitated and they're stupid and loony over the things they're pushing for and hoping Trump will do and hoping we'll get out of the way of Trump doing. But they're agitating for it nonetheless. We do suffer from that. The Democrats either want to be reasonable or just not be the squeaky wheel. And, we lose a lot on that. And it's sad, but I can't say I don't understand it. You don't see me out demonstrating all the time. It's not where I feel comfortable. And I, console myself by saying, well, I make these other contributions toward those fights, outlining procedural ways in which the Senate can fight on our behalf. But no, that's not enough. It isn't. And if I go out and demonstrate, it won't change much either because other people will continue on with their lives. I know, and it's just as hopeless as ever because it's like saying my vote doesn't count. My protest doesn't count, so my vote doesn't count. My protest doesn't count, so I don't do it. And it's a cop-out and it's wrong. Okay, well, having laid the blame squarely on myself, I don't know what to tell you about that. It's one of those self-fulfilling prophecies, unfortunately. But we'll at least tell it like it is and lay it out for people to decide what to do about it. Okay, so we've eaten up considerably more time on once again on that subject, but I think there's our value added for the program. The rest of these things, of course, many of you will have already read these articles. Many of you can, of course, read them for yourselves. We just read articles to give ourselves ideas to spout like we just did. Okay. Another thing that I think is worth some time, let's say, is one of the new appointments. The Trump appointments or nominations continue to mount. And one of the latest is a rather obscure bit, and I think probably another one that won't require any kind of Senate input on it, but seems like an important piece that, though it's getting press attention, and that's the only reason we're going to be able to give it attention here. We value the press, despite the fact that we don't think that they spit enough fire. That's our job. We take their reporting. They report, we decide. We decide to rant. That's what we're going to do. The latest appointment, another senior advisor for, as they're terming it, senior advisor for policy to the incoming Trump administration, will be Stephen Miller. Not Steve Miller, the guy from the band, but Stephen, Stephen Miller, who's a guy who ought to be banned. How's that? You like that? There's a couple of profiles of him that I'll share just to give you some idea of who we're talking about and where he's coming from. Oh, by the way, I did want to sneak in this bit of news that I picked up via TPM just to kind of clarify what was going on. One, I need to say Joan had it right yesterday, and I should not need to say that. I only say that Joan had it right, which you probably already assumed, because I spoke up on top of her and said, oh, isn't it something else? And I was wrong. She was pointing out the very scary story about the Trump team having asked for the identification of climate scientists who had participated in climate change conferences and work pertaining to climate change in the Department of Energy. And I said, oh, isn't it EPA? And she said, oh, I'm sorry, EPA. No, you had it right. I was wrong. And what I mean is No, I'm sorry. No, it wasn't your fault. I stepped on it and stepped in it and then stepped on you and said, no, I thought it was EPA. It wasn't. It was the Department of Energy. She was right all along. However, we got to at least note that the Trump team now disavows this supposed request to the Department of Energy, not the EPA, asking for a list of staffers and contractors who had been engaged in climate policy discussions. The Trump team says that was not authorized as a part of our standard protocol. This person who sent it has been properly counseled. An unnamed Trump transition official told CNN. I doubt very much whether they've been counseled at all. I doubt very much whether they're telling the truth about it not being authorized, but that's their stance on it, and I thought we ought to at least note it for the record, and it was a good opportunity to say, whoops, not EPA, Department of Energy. Joan had it right. I got it wrong. That should go without saying. That's just standard disclaimer for the show. How about that? I should just wear it as a sign around my neck. If we had video, you could see me. I put on a dunce cap and a sign around my neck like the Chinese Cultural Revolution that would say, I tell lies about what Joan says. and written in Chinese. If any of you are Mandarin speakers, help us out with that. Okay? Let's see. So Stephen Miller, as I mentioned, will be a top advice and counseled upon advisor to the Trump administration. Who is this jackass and where did he come from? By the way, he's like about 30 years old. So who is this dude? Politico has this story and we'll share it and comment upon it in the few minutes we have remaining. There's plenty more, of course, and naturally the after show will pick up the slack on that. But who is this guy? Well, he's a campaign staffer, and in the wake of his nomination to this job, or appointment, I guess, to this job, one of the staffers, oh my goodness gracious me, oh my, look who it is, at Politico magazine has retweeted her profile of Miller under the title of The Believer. And I say, oh my goodness, look who this is, because the author is Julia, and I never did her, I'm going to mangle the name. Is it Ioffe? Ioffe. And she just got herself wound up in controversy yesterday and may have been fired from, was she still writing for Politico at the time, because she made a crack about Trump hinting that, or at least I guess, here's what he actually announcing that Ivanka would be given an office, I guess, in the East Wing, offices traditionally assigned to the office of the First Lady. We've, of course, had every indication that Melania Trump will not be serving in even as the ceremonial roles of the First Lady. She's going to remain in New York, and I have really not much to comment on in that respect. You know, it might even be a good move. She's not comfortable in that kind of a public role. And there is actually precedent for people who aren't the president's spouse serving in the ceremonial role of First Lady. And Ivanka might be fine doing that. Might be a good place for her to be. Remember, of course, that Republicans hated First Ladies having any serious policy role until, of course, they didn't hate it anymore. But okay, whatever. But then Julia cracked wise, or I guess not that wise, on Twitter that Donald Trump has a well-known weirdness about how he regards Ivanka, and it strays a little uncomfortably often into sexual territory, and she noted that, but she also used profanity in doing so, and that's a no-no somehow. And I don't know. I think she might have got fired. I'm not 100% certain about that one, but she certainly probably had her mentions destroyed yesterday. But it's her profile, and we're going to share it anyway. In honor of her brave outspokenness, The Believer, how Stephen Miller went from obscure Capitol Hill staffer to Donald Trump's warm-up act and resident ideologue. This is a June 2016 piece, and begins thus. Before Donald Trump took the stage in Dallas on a June evening, a string of warm-up acts, mostly local politicians and conservative personalities, took their turns addressing the crowd. A local talk radio host growled that if any of the other 16 Republican contenders would have been fine, any of them would have been fine soldiers in the fight to advance the evangelical agenda, then Donald Trump is an M1 Abrams tank in that fight. The crowd whooped and cheered, and then came a last salvo before the Trump tank rolled on stage, a svelte young man, dressed in a thin-lapelled suit with a pocket square and a hairline receding to reveal a strong, luminous forehead. "Please give a big Texas welcome," announced a voice in the darkness, "to Senior Policy Advisor to Donald Trump, Steve Miller." "How's everybody in Texas doing today?" Miller said, grinning and flashing a peace sign as men in the crowd bellowed, "Steve!" Why? I don't know. Miller has been warming up the crowd at pretty much every Trump rally since March. I guess that's the reason. With fiery speeches full of conspiratorial populism. Oh, we need more of that. Delivered with a nearly immobile face. I guess we need that. I don't know. This time he began with Hillary Clinton. Gee whiz. "In recent days, I'm sure you've seen Hillary Clinton step up her attacks on Donald Trump," he intoned, and then closed his eyes and nodded, savoring the crowd's boos. "And you've seen all the usual special interests. All the special interests step up their attacks on Donald Trump, too. And the one thing that all these groups have in common is that they run the show now, and they want to make sure they run the show forever." The point, as Miller would lay it out in Dallas, and has laid out in countless times before, is that there is a vast conspiracy that blurs together all wings of the American political spectrum in its quest to keep the American masses down. He's a man of the people. "That's what this all comes down to," Miller said, picking up steam and poking the air with his index finger. "Everybody who stands against Donald Trump are the people who have been running the country into the ground, who have been controlling the levers of power. They are the people who are responsible for our open borders, for our shrinking middle class, for all our terrible trade deals." His voice stiffly added decibels. "Everything that is wrong with this country today, the people who are opposed to Donald Trump are responsible for." Broader brush, could I get you one? Trump has been coming under fire for his response to the Orlando shooting, and that night in Dallas, Miller pivoted from whipping up fear and loathing to whipping up fear and loathing, and then calling it love. As the crowd began to chant, "Build the wall," a grinning Miller explained, "We're going to build that wall high, and we're going to build it tall," he said. "We're going to build that wall. We're going to build it out of love. We're going to build it out of love for every family who wants to raise their kids in safety and peace. We're building it out of love for America and Americans of all backgrounds." Miller is 30 years old and in some ways a quintessential member of the Trump 2016 menagerie, an obscure character suddenly elevated to a national role by dint of hard work, loyalty, and the boss's favor. He's often overshadowed by the campaign's more flamboyant figures. He's begun appearing on CNN and Fox to defend Trump and explain his policies in strikingly complete and adamant sentences. But among this roster of political outsiders, Miller stands out, especially for people who understand the new forces afoot in Republican politics. He's deeply connected to some of the most powerful insurgent threads in the Washington GOP, most notably Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, of course, and the Breitbart media machine. So basically, same circle, but okay, one more example of the same. As an aide on Capitol Hill, he was a behind-the-scenes architect of the successful effort to kill comprehensive immigration reform in 2014. And while it's hard to gauge how much Trump is amenable to influence by anyone, at least by anyone that he didn't beget, there is no question that Miller is deep and serious on the one question that most drives Trump's unlikely campaign. Miller's talent for combining operational zeal with the ability to effectively frame an idea into one devastating laser beam made him a prized Sessions lieutenant in Washington. When it comes to issues and messaging and policy, there isn't anybody else that I've known that would be as valuable to a presidential campaign as he, Sessions, told me, maybe other than Karl Rove. Of course, Sessions' opinion only goes so far, and many people would say that Steve Bannon fills that role. But anyway, Miller also cuts a deeply unsettling figure even to many in his own party. His 9-year career working for some of the most politically fringe figures on the Hill. He also worked for Michelle Bachmann, for instance, and helped David Brat in his primary defeat of Eric Cantor. Was preceded by a trail of writings and provocations that go all the way back to high school, one that has raised the eyebrows of even conservative Republicans. And we'll have to pause here on that one. I recommend that you read through the rest of this, and not just because it was by Julia Ioffe either, but it makes some terrific points. And there's a companion piece that I sort of put aside. I'm going to call it a companion piece that'll give you a quick taste of what kind of stuff that was that he wrote. Slate has this piece, which I thought. Well, without even getting into quoting what exactly it was that he wrote, I think makes the point quite clear. The headline, "The Duke newspaper columns by Trumpkin Stephen Miller that made GOPers say, 'My God,' by Osita Nwanevu." I'm hoping I've got that pronunciation right. Again, in Slate. And I think her first paragraph kind of sums it up. And you should go and read the pieces yourself, but they're not terribly... And I guess that's the point here. They're not imaginative. They're sort of stock college conservative newspaper stuff, and like sort of almost cringeworthy, eye-rolly stuff. The conservative student newspaper column, this Slate piece begins, is one of the most predictable genres of writing in existence. There's an art to it, certain formal conventions to be followed, certain stock arguments and phrases that demand reuse. Stephen Miller, tapped on Tuesday as a senior advisor in Trump's White House, would have been well qualified to teach a master class on the format during his time at Duke, where he wrote a series of columns for the Duke Chronicle decrying political correctness and other leftist tyrannies with all the milquetoast reactionary spleen of a Wall Street Journal editorial writers more than twice his age. So that gives you a flavor of where he's coming from. And there's a number of quotes, and they are standard stock stuff. But then, of course, that, and it's not even that opinions like that or people like that haven't been senior advisors to Republican presidents before. But just to give you a taste of what he's like, you should review the Slate piece and also take note of the fact that lower down in the piece at the conclusion, we have this. White nationalist Richard Spencer, also much in the news these days, right? Richard Spencer apparently also attended Duke at the same time and told Mother Jones in October that Miller was even more outspoken in meetings of the Duke Conservative Union, where the two reportedly bonded over, quote, concerns that immigrants from non-European countries were not assimilating. He says, it's funny no one's picked up on the Stephen Miller connection. I knew him very well when I was at Duke, but I'm kind of glad no one's talked about this because I don't want it to harm Trump. So, interesting. Stealth character endorsed by Richard Spencer, biggest jerk of the bunch, as far as I can tell, in Trump world. Just so by way of information, take a look at the Politico piece and the Slate piece. I'll include them in the roundup, and that'll give you a flavor for who else will be advising Donald Trump in his administration, such as it might be. Anyway, time to pass the baton this Thursday for the after shows. Thank God it's Jovadi episode, that being Thursday, and here's what's coming up. More than 1,200 historians sign a statement warning Trump is poised to use hysteria and untruths to trample people's rights. An Orange County, California college professor goes into hiding after pro-Trump right-wingers bombard her with death threats. And Trump pulls out of a Rio hotel project named in a criminal probe. I'll tell you what's coming up on the last half and more after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, they've picked up on this one. A new poll finds Trump Republicans have a growing fondness for Putin, Russia, and white nationalism, coupled with a marked increase in disdain for America's time-honored institutions and principles. And Newt Gingrich brags that the 70-year-old Soviet plan model Republicans embraced is finally coming to fruition. Wow. Hang on for that.